Thank you so much for sticking around. I know that you would all like to, go network, grab a drink, etc. So really appreciate it. Look, in the past, and even up to a degree now, I think, a lot of the SEO success was measured in how much traffic we could bring in, right? To a degree where I started to think whether it is becoming a bit of a vanity metric. And as Arno and Murat also talked about today, about kind of the topic of traffic, I think maybe we are all thinking the same. That being said, I of course had to realize that is not the case. It's not a vanity metric. In fact, it can be a very strong leading indicator of success if looked at correctly. However, as we are looking ahead and thinking about how in some cases people don't even need to click through to websites anymore to get the information they need, it's very important that we talk more about this topic of bridging the gap between traffic and conversions. Because the traffic that we do get now has to do that much more for us, right? That much more for our business. And that's not only for the reason of AI, right? I think that has been the case for a while now. So, first a little bit about myself, but I think already a great job was done on that. Head of SEO and Product Lead at Atolls and co-host of the SEO Product Unveiled podcast. But importantly, my first personal experience with conversion rate optimization was a few years back when I was part of a cross-departmental experimentation task force. Initially joined as SEO representative just to, keep people in check, but ultimately I was able to run my own tests, or co-host tests and so on. It was quite fun, I have to be honest about that. Now, little disclaimer, the way I will talk about CRO today might come across as a little bit simplistic because you might hear me saying CRO team did that or CRO is doing this and that, right? I know that is often not the case in organizations, right? CRO as a discipline is often being spread across a number of product and tech teams, for example. Maybe it is managed by a growth team. But regardless of the organizational structure, the goal is the same, right? Driving those conversions, the big ones, like maybe a purchase or a sign-up, but also those micro-conversions that really can drive that audit value, maybe some clicks, impressions of interest, and so on. So, another thing that is clear is that often in organizations, SEO and CRO are still living in different worlds, right? I, however, like to believe that that is often not intentional, that is rather structural. This is why I would like to introduce this super simple SEO CRO maturity model that you can use if you would like to assess where you are right now and where you would like to get. Whether you are totally siloed at the moment, teams are working totally separately, no exchange, etc. Or maybe you are on level 2 already, where a lot of us are, I think, right? There's occasional collaboration, maybe some shared KPIs, and so on. On level 3, you can be very, very proud of yourself. You're totally integrated. There's a lot of shared goals. There's, experimentation together, and so on. I think, honestly, that this is difficult to get to. Maybe in some organizations, it doesn't make as much sense than in others, etc. But this model is not about perfection. It's about progress. So I will share my slides, so if you would like to, you can use this later. But to really set the screen, we're gonna set the bar low and start with some negative examples of what can happen if there is lack of communication and collaboration between these disciplines. So, first example, maybe CRO would like to increase newsletter signups. So they test out these kind of pop-ups, right? And maybe on some page types, they even see a nice bump up. So how about we just roll it out site-wide, right? However, without talking with the SEO team, they don't realize that the type of pop-up that they have rolled out is constituting this sort of intrusive interstitials that Google explicitly warns against, in particularly on mobile. So rankings drop, they lose the very audience they were trying to attract in the first place. Example 2, maybe your product team is having some very educated hypothesis, right? Because they actually looked at data. They looked at scroll depth data and realized that Well, actually, the large majority of our users are not scrolling beyond a certain point. So why are we bloating our code and everything with all this content on the bottom? Sure, understand, good hypothesis. Unfortunately, by removing this content, ultimately, they may remove important elements, maybe internal linking, maybe structured data, even just some super long-tail keywords that were somehow attracting the right kind of traffic, right? However, it's not about pointing fingers. The other way, the same could happen, right? Maybe SEO would really like to improve page performance, so they decide, let us audit things a little bit, let us look through things. And they find that certain page types are actually having these very high quality large images that are not helping, to say the least. So somehow they push this through, they remove it, and then they are surprised that there's conversion rate drop, right? I mean, maybe the image they removed actually included some important CTA. Or even if not, maybe it was such a focal point of that landing page or type of landing page that now the user is not understanding anymore at first glance what the page is about, and they bounce more, they engage less, and so on. And look, these examples are not about telling you that anybody is doing anything wrong per se, right? It's about showing you that even well-intentioned work can backfire if there is this lack of communication or collaboration. So let's talk about how to avoid these mistakes by integrating SEO and CRO better with each other and into product development. I'm not gonna give you the silver bullet on how exactly to solve this in your own organization, right? Because I don't know that, but I would like to introduce at least some tips, right? High-level examples that you can utilize. So first of all, focus on intent. But I don't mean, your high-level informational, navigational, etc. I mean really digging in there and trying to understand not only what are people searching, but why are they searching? What problems are they trying to solve? What tasks are they trying to compete? And you can utilize maybe some frameworks for that, like jobs to be done, to really understand what role that page plays in people's decision-making journey. Or, as Arno said earlier, you can talk with your support teams, you can look at post-purchase surveys, forums, etc. You get the idea. Ultimately, you want to understand really what are users confused about, what motivates them, digging a little bit deeper. It's also very important to design with both disciplines in mind, because design is not just about aesthetics. It's also about things like hierarchy, clarity, and actionability. And whereas SEO may look at things like structured headings or crawlability or internal links and so on, CRO will look at other things, like where does the attention go? How easy it is to convert, or how can we maybe even remove some friction for that user, right? Now, the great news is that a lot of the best practices overlap, because clear, concise copy helps both, right? Logical layout, mobile-first fast-loading pages will help both of these disciplines as well. So ultimately, ensure that nobody is optimizing in isolation. Don't remove a CTA just because it may improve page performance. Don't hide content behind tabs just because it will make the page look cleaner. Or you know what? I tell you better. Do it. Test it out. But if you do not look at your own isolated metrics. SEO and CRO don't need to, of course, look at the exact same things, right? But they should at least agree on a shared set of metrics to monitor. So if you are making some changes to your title tags, for example, make sure you're not only looking at the CTR, but also at things like bounce rate, engagement rate on the page, how did it change, and so on. And if you're testing out some button placements or button copy changes, etc., again, don't just look at the conversion regarding that, but also whether it had any negative impact on your traffic. Also, think about having some shared planning view, right? Whether that is a roadmap or an experimentation board or whatever you would like to use, because the best time to involve SEO in a CRO test and vice versa is not the day before the launch, it is during ideation. So ensure that you allow people to have a certain degree of visibility over each other's work, they are able to provide feedback, and so on. Ultimately, the advice I would like to give you is to really create a culture where collaboration is expected. It is not optional. And in the best case scenario, maybe even it is coming naturally to people, right? So let's drill down a little bit. I would like to talk about where SEO and CRO collaboration can live. Now, I could think of these 3 layers. If you have any other ideas, I would like to chat with you later, so please come find me. But there is this kind of pre-click or SERP experiments phase, right? A little bit more relevant for SEO. Maybe you're testing out addition of some structured data or otherwise framing, trying to change how the page is framed in the SERPs, right? With, title changes and so on. Then, as the user is moving onto your page, of course, you would like to influence how they are experimenting or experiencing, that page. So this is where you can do things like CTA placement and copy changes, whether you lead with a summary or maybe a story, right? Even the inclusion of video explainers or otherwise kind of engagement-oriented kind of widgets. Maybe you want to test that out, right, to break up long-form content. I feel this middle is where the collaboration truly lives, right? And then there is the post-click conversion flow, which might be a little bit more important to conversion rate optimization folk. That being said, I think it's very important that SEO also stays in the loop, in particular if the people came from organic search, because that is the stage and after where you can really have this kind of learning and feedback loop in place. All right, a little bit of a shift. Let's talk about why I think that CRO matters even more now. And I don't think I need to explain what I mean by now. Of course, we need to accept that we cannot always compete for attention anymore. But what we can do is to really compete for engagement, right? I mean, I talked about how the traffic we do get should be doing more for us and so on. Also, whatever way you want to call them, right, answer engines, otherwise, LLM power tools, whatever, they can do a lot of things really well, right? They can provide summaries of information well, but there are things that they cannot do so well, right? They cannot show your brand personality or deliver hands-on experiments-based product comparison. They also don't particularly well tell a personal story, right, from your CEO or otherwise expert in your company. So these are the areas where we can still win, right, where we can really win. But we will not get there by guesswork. We will get there by testing things out. But I also don't want to give the wrong impression. It's not just about experimentation, right? We talk a lot about that because of the CRO aspect of this talk. But it can also be about being fast, right, at getting fixes done or acting on best practices or maybe on just very, very strong ideas. And CRO is really good at that, right, to act fast. I mean, the whole idea of CRO is like this, rapid kind of testing and comparing things and whatnot. So CRO is good at turning content from passive to purposeful. And in return, it's also very good for us SEOs, right, because it can help us to prove business impact beyond traffic. But I know that many of you might think that, hey, what if those CRO tests are actually tanking our traffic, right? I mean, we talked about it. Like, we started this presentation with the negative examples, right? That being said, the answer is not to stop testing, right? The answer is just to test smarter. So, in order to not break your traffic, try a couple of things, right? Before you test, and we're talking now of testing for CRO, right? Make sure that the tool you are using is actually able to segment by traffic source. So you can really understand the impact on the users that you particularly care about at this stage. Set some guardrails in place as well, right? During the test, make sure that you also keep an eye on your SEO KPIs in real time. And also don't forget to keep a change log because that can really help later with debugging as well. Now, after the test, there's a couple of things that you can do as well. For example, as we already talked about it a lot, don't just measure conversions, but also measure whether there was any impact on your traffic, right? And don't forget that sharing learnings is really, really helpful as well, particularly ones where CRO wins by SEO says healthy. But I know that in CRO, we are very, very much familiar with this concept of A/B testing, multivariate testing, right? We can do things like that. But there are areas where these don't work very well, especially when we truly want to understand the impact on our traffic. But what we can do is to use some causal-ish methods. So, some of these causal-ish methods that you might be able to use, I'm sure all of you heard about before, maybe under a different name, or I'm not sure. But difference, I think, is what a lot of us understand under SEO A/B testing, right? This is where you have your test group, and then you have your control group, so a very similar group where you're not making that change. You could also do some interrupted time series testing, right? I think a lot of us do this. Yeah? Agree? Cool. You can also do this because this is where a lot of monitoring comes into the picture as well, right? You're testing before and after you make that change. And staggered rollout, a lot of us probably have some experience with that as well, right? This is where you maybe test out on a subset of your domain or maybe only in one market but not on the others and so on. So these are not perfect either, but they can be very good indications. So my advice to you is to start small, learn quickly, and repeat what works. That's very important. All right, but I know I can feel it as well that was a lot of theory. So I thought I'd give you a quick example which might help you a little bit almost visualize in your head how a successful integration of SEO and CRO into product development might look like. Now, I will keep this also a little bit high level. I will not go into the nitty-gritty of product discovery workshops, etc. But let's imagine that we have a company, right, an organization. Simple. They want to bring new life to their online magazine. They want to achieve a couple of goals, right? People are not really spending enough time, not engaging with the page, so they want to improve that. They also want to create some more clear pathways towards the product pages. And they are just bored, right? Text, image-based articles. They want to try out some new formats. So the product team realizes they cannot solve this alone with the content team, hence they bring together a number of participants, SEO, CRO, UX research, and so on, into a sort of product discovery workshop. In the problem space, they carry out a number of tasks and ultimately land on this central question that can help them guide the rest of the workshop. How might we increase engagement on our magazine while also helping users move toward relevant product pages using formats that work for both SEO and CRO? And they move into the problem space, and they do a number of other, discovery tasks, etc., ultimately landing on an idea that they can all get behind. They all want to try out video-based or video-driven articles. And this is where collaboration can truly click in, because this is where SEO from day zero can basically provide their input on technical elements, but also on the content focus and so on. And CRO can do the same, right? Talking about CTA copy, CTA positioning, where the user should be taken. What should be the format of the video, right? Long or shorter form, are we using overlays or buttons, and so on. And importantly, they also mention, you know what? It is great if we have some prototypes, do some user research, but once we reach that point of actually having some MVPs, this is the area where we really need to focus on data collection. So how about we introduce some heat map tool, for example? Now at this stage, SEO might jump in and say, hey, agree, sounds great, we need data, but let's not forget that these third-party tools can really put a strain on our page performance on occasions. So how about that? And again, this is where great collaboration comes in, because now together this ad hoc team can totally understand the trade-offs and make smarter calls together. And in this particular case, the smarter balanced call might just be that we're going to include this heat map, right? We're going to collect that data, but as soon as we are not looking for data anymore, we are going to remove it. I don't know if this video will work or not. We'll give it a try. But basically, okay, not. Then I was careful. I knew if it might not work, there's some screenshots for you. But basically, with all that in mind, the product manager can now collect all the acceptance criteria, create a small batch of MVPs, and maybe they set up some check-in meetings in the coming weeks, where the team can now come together, look at data, talk about iteration, and so on. With that, I would like to tell you, this example was not about showing you a successful new product, right? It was about showing you how a process and having that in place, this collaborative process, can be really helpful. Because now, regardless of whether this is successful or not, the team can come together again, right? And they can win together. But also, if this becomes a fail, they now have a process to go back to, and they can turn that into a learning opportunity. So ultimately, the message here is to have the right people in the room to ask better questions, make smarter decisions, and build things that actually move the needle. Good. As we start to wrap up, I'm sure some of you might be asking, hey, great in theory. I mean, I hope you're thinking that, but how will we, I mean, maybe you think it sucks, right? But if some of you think it looks great in theory, but I have no idea how will I bring this live in my organization, then I would like to give you a couple of tips for that as well, right? Again, no silver bullet. I cannot exactly tell you how it will work in your company, but something maybe to ease into it. So, set up some regular cross-functional syncs, right? Don't have to be major, big organizations. You can set it up every 2 weeks, for example, 30 minutes to check in. Goal is not to agree on everything. It is really just to stay aligned and avoid those blind spots. Define shared KPIs. Again, don't have to be a full-blown dashboard overhaul. It could really be just starting with one single metric. And create that shared planning view, right? Whether it's an experimentation board or a roadmap or whatever. Maybe the most important, prioritize education, because a lot of the friction comes from not truly understanding what the other team is focusing on. So, try to set up some brown bag launches, maybe show, explain to developers how they are working on, how maybe they can learn about indexation, crawling, rendering, etc., the differences. Maybe you want to invite your SEO teams to some UX research sessions. Or maybe you can just simply show CRO how SEO is evaluating the page and vice versa. Finally, celebrate shared wins, provide credit where credit is due, because over time, these shared successes will build the momentum that you need in order to build the culture that you want to reach. I think these are my old slides. I wanted to skip this to shorten it a little bit, so I'm just going to quickly slide through it and wrap up with the key takeaways. Firstly, SEO and CRO are not separate. I also don't want to tell you that they are the same. They are not. But I believe they should be looked at as partners, because traffic is ultimately only as valuable as what it leads to, as we already heard from other speakers today. Integration takes intention, so focus on that shared work, shared goals, etc. Use the maturity model if you would like to assess where you are and where you would like to get. But remember, it is not about perfection. It's about progress. And finally, test and measure together. Prioritize the whole journey, not only the entry point. And with that, I would like to say a huge thank you for listening. Come find me later if you have questions, or otherwise online. Check out the podcast. And really thank you for being here.